You're not Denise. I was going to say, Denise, I thought you were off today.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started here about 30 seconds. We've got a number of you already in and ready to go. Happy Friday to you. One thing, as you're coming in, one thing we're going to do at the very beginning here is just do a little interesting exercise. As you're just joining us today, I'm going to ask you to answer a quick question for you. Simple question. Please, and by the way, my name is Maury Giles. I should say this from the outset. I am a partner with Heart+Mind Strategies, and we're now on our 14th roundtable session since the COVID reality has started. I know we do have some new folks that have joined us today that haven't been with us in the past. We really appreciate you being here. When we do this work, what we're seeking to do is to be able to have a dialogue and be able to really kind of take a pause on a Friday morning, afternoon, depending on where you happen to be, and talk about the things that we're learning, and then have some dialogue around what ideas you have to be able to share as well. And today we're looking forward to an exercise to be able to walk through a lot of things that we've been learning to date on our end. And then a little bit later today, we'll have a guest, Yogesh Chavda, who is the Global Head of Insights for Pinterest, who's going to share some really interesting things that they've been looking at by the way people are sharing information through their platform, which we're excited to have them join us as well. So we wanted to do this first exercise. I'm going to give about 10, 15 more seconds to let you answer that, to tell us what are the emotions that you're feeling right now as it relates to current events. I'll give about a little less than 30 seconds left. We want to start out with this question to see where the audience is at, our friends and partners and all of you who have joined us today. You have about 15 seconds left. You can click any of those that might stand out to you. All right. So as a group, we're seeing a lot as in this poll here real quick, of the one that you selected there that you saw. And you can see as a group, cautious and concerned. Some chose to be anxious, worried, angry, and hopeful in terms of the ones that you chose as your top one. And this is helpful context in understanding where we're all at. And this, as you know, those of you who've been with us for a while, we're tracking these very things among the general public, and want to start out with a quick sense of sharing what we've learned as of our latest tracking as of just last night. Now, to do this, just a quick thumbs up. Andrew, Mark, you're seeing my screen? To do this, I want to share just a couple of high-level findings of what we've been gathering and learning about in terms of the general public's reaction. We're kind of summing this up as the divided reality. We know this is not going away anytime soon, and the uncertainty is pretty strong and remaining there. Couple of things that we saw that are different and that are nuanced for this particular week. First off, the coverage of the COVID and the pandemic, while it had been dropping all the way until toward the end of May, over the last 3 cycles, has been increasing. In the last 2 weeks, we are seeing a decline in terms of the number who are tracking daily the news on the protests or a lot of the social unrest. Still about half of the country still remains something there, but the attention that's being paid has gone down a little bit, but overall on the pandemic is starting to go back up just a bit. We've seen a corresponding increase of now 3 out of 4, right, hovering around 3 out of 4, a little bit of an uptick of people believing that this is a real threat as the discussions about reopening and the debate that's there. But the interesting nuance that we noticed this week as of last night is we saw a big jump in caution and in fear. So saying that people are saying that they're scared, and the caution increasing a bit. If you look back to the last time we saw that increase at that level of fear was at the beginning of April, right when this was really taking off. However, there's a big difference today in that we have a lot more people, 10% of the country, which translates to a lot of people who are expressing that anger that we talked a little bit about last week. And that's the mental mindset that's going on in the background and the way people are approaching and feeling about what's going on right now. But there's an interesting dichotomy that emerges. we're still seeing hope and confidence increase, even while we saw fear, caution, and anger increase. You can see hopefulness up to the highest point it's ever been, and confidence, the highest point it's ever been. And so you've got this interesting back and forth with the way our country and Americans across the country are feeling about this, of that anger, fear, and at the same time feeling hopeful and feeling confident. The division, however, is widening. It's not surprising with what we're seeing and hearing in the news and the conversation about this, of what's happening in this state or that state, the political division on a health issue that's rampant. But we saw a dramatic increase over the last 2 weeks of Americans believing that this is driving us further apart. It's about half of the country now that are saying that, the highest that we've seen to date since the pandemic started, in contrast to where we began with a moment of feeling like maybe this is going to be uniting us more. The division around should we open or not, should we remain open or not, it's split right across the country, almost 50-50. And the individual risks, whether when we started asking a couple of weeks ago on specific activities, should people be able to choose for themselves, or should these activities be forbidden? When you look at the things that people should choose for themselves, just in the last 2 weeks, you're seeing a dip on doing things like going to the barber or having events like weddings and funerals. Still a majority of Americans who feel you should be able to choose, but a drop. But then interestingly, on the protest side, almost a 10-point drop, well, a little more than 10 point, 11-point drop on whether people should be able to attend protests and demonstrations. Some of the concerns about the spread are being evident now as people are processing this. But this reality is such an interesting dynamic, because concern, caution, and worry is what we're seeing at play at overall across everyone. But you have pockets that are feeling angry and scared, yet increasing pockets feeling hopeful and confident. People feeling slow that we should restrict activities and be slower to open. Other people feeling we should reopen and let people decide. That's not surprising that when you see on the Wall Street Journal just yesterday, the editorial around flare-ups are inevitable, but new lockdowns aren't the answer. Whereas in the New York Times, taking on a partisan editorial position around some Republicans aren't in denial, but Trump still is. And the political debate and the uncertainty around what's true, what's not, what's really happening with cases versus hospitalizations, deaths, should we open or should we not? And so that puts us in a place, of wanting to be able to answer this question for ourselves. As we're agonizing as companies, this was also in the Wall Street Journal, companies agonize over reopening timetables as COVID-19 spreads. What is it that we do, or what is it that we should be doing as we move forward? And what we want to do with this group here today, before we dive in more deeply into the things that we actually have to be able to share of new data, is we want to be able to get from you some discussion around this current environment, where now all of a sudden the cases are going up. We all talked about this a month or two ago. It was going to come. It's coming fast, but then so many different ways that it's being dealt with. So we'd like you to deal with these questions for about 10 or 12 minutes, and we're going to discuss it, and we're going to see where things will go from there. And the way we're going to do that is do a quick, only 3 different, it's a large group here with 50 plus people. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you into 3 different groups and talk about it. So as you accept this into a different room, you'll have a moderator in your room to be able to discuss that. If you'll go ahead and jump in with your group and make that happen. Those of you that are still in here, you should notice that you've been invited into a breakout room, a smaller group, for about a 10-minute discussion, and then we're going to come back in with the full group.
I left the room too soon. I was trying to get rid of the screen.
And now I don't have my second screen where I'm at right here. And so it's like,
Boy, I like the facial thing going there. How things in Arizona?
I'm actually in Utah right now,
Oh.
but they're going well.
You drive or fly?
Drove.
Oh.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope that in the 15 minutes or so that you had to be able to have some dialogue right there. We hope with that dialogue that started some, we know that started some ideas already. Some of those that I saw from the group discussions that we're really learning that we're here to stay. It's going to be a long haul, and that means we got to rethink plans and morale being impacted in that process as well. Doubling down on message and clarity repetition, being smart, getting that out there, shared messaging, working with other partners. A lot of you were talking about flexibility and the need to be able to adapt and recognize different responses and allow that individual input. You got to act before understanding the full problem, and that's kind of difficult, especially when that's not what we're not used to. There's an obvious hard push on tech and peer networking for meetings, but that comes with its challenges as well. Some talk about pushing timelines back, and we hope that maybe with connections you made today, you can offline share with each other more thoughts that you've had about that. Maybe Labor Day starts to look like a new milestone. I saw some had shared, but staged rollout in terms of plan for where you're coming back in. Addressing PTO challenges with the market reality being what it is and the workload, maybe people not taking it, and how do you getting that burnout? Some of you talking about that not all segments are experiencing the same, so you've got to figure things out into adapting in that regard. Then the communications from leadership being very critical in terms of consistent, honest, and updating frequently, and part of leadership is compromise, an interesting idea. Now, there's a lot, we'll take the other notes that were captured, but does anybody want to just add to that you felt like there was something really compelling that was talked about that you thought would be beneficial for everyone to hear? Feel free to chime in if you'd like to right now.
I would just say one of the things that I found really useful that this has brought about is things like this collaboration with people who I don't normally get to talk to. That's the thing I've learned the most over the past, couple months.
Being able to engage with others and have that dialogue. Yeah.
Mari, there are a couple of comments that really strike at the heart of what it means to be a leader in this environment. The first is the very nature of uncertainty that we're all dealing with, and the length of time is undermining people's confidence and indirectly their kind of trust and confidence in leaders, which is a real challenge. But then the other issue that I thought was interesting was this idea that, we're used to being able to start addressing a problem by gauging what it is. What is the problem? And in this situation, that is such a moving target that it brings a lot of uncertainty to leaders. And so I think that the point that as leaders, we've got to be flexible, but we also have to understand that we are in turbulent waters, more than just our business, but how we lead, both with our people and with our customers it's never been a more difficult environment.
Really is. Well, with that, and thank you, Mark, and with that, your staff, your audience, your customers and so forth, we had gone, they're experiencing that same uncertainty just like we are. We want to share one last thing before we turn over to Yogesh from Pinterest to share what they've been seeing on an emotional level. We had 903 Americans that we have talked with in a qualitative setting to just over the last few weeks. One of the things that we asked them to do is look at a number of pictures of how they feel when it comes to finding information they can trust. Just like we talked about the information we're trying to trust to make business decisions. These are the pictures they picked. Now, we always use pictures of kids when we're looking at emotions, but out of the 20 or so we gave them, these are the ones they picked. And I think we could all reflect upon this ourselves and the emotions that we feel of trying to process that as well. In the general public, here we have this health-related issue that the biggest predictor of different attitudes is predominantly on something partisan and political. And so that divide is there, and it makes it difficult to find information that's relevant. We also know from a trust perspective that trust in government has gone down. There's a little bit of uptick here in the local level that's right now in the last couple of weeks. Health resources much higher, doctors being at the very top, but the CDC and the World Health Organization much lower than they were just 3 months ago. And media much, much lower, although the last 2 weeks saw something that was there. But we want to give this little bit of inspiration to you before we look at some of the stuff from Pinterest. Of we asked these people to do an exercise for us, and when we send this to you, we think it'll be interesting to spend more time with it. But in just a couple of minutes here, we asked them to do an interesting exercise. What are some metaphors that would be what it's like for you right now to find trusted information? One quote, we'll only share one quote that kind of captured this idea that I like to be in the know about important issues, and it's taken me months to find what I believe my reliable set of trusted resources or sources. When they're not available, it seriously feels like a major undertaking to find a new reliable source of information. And this is just a John Q. Public talking about their reality. Let me take you through a few of these interesting metaphors and see what inspirationally it takes to you. One person told us that it's like trying to find the last puzzle piece in a puzzle, but all the puzzles are the same shape, just different colors. And so imagine that feeling that gets there. Another talked about, there were a few that talked about gold or pearls or diamonds, but that it can be rare and hard to find. Another talked about the fact that it's kind of like a watermelon, that it may look really good on the outside, but it's rotten on the inside once you open it up. Another talked about it being that obnoxious friend at a party or family member where it makes you cringe when they start talking, and then it just gets worse the more it goes on. Another talked about being at a club or a disco or a party where there's a lot of people and you're looking for that family member, or in this case, to talk about a spouse that you're looking for. And then once you find that source that you trust, you stay close to them in this midst of this really chaotic, constantly changing, very crowded environment. Another talked about it being like a buffet, that most that's out there is nasty, but there could be some good surprises as you're working your way and having to taste. Another talked about it being similar to the dynamics of divorce, that you feel like you're constantly having to look at the information to say, well, whose side do I believe in what was just shared? Another talked about it on a similar tone as being like slime, that it's like it just changes. The information you get changes to form to the mold of the person that's holding it. Another talked about it being like the weather, that if you don't like it, just wait 10 minutes, it's going to change and the new information will be out there. And then finally, one said it was like a unicorn. Maybe there just isn't a trustworthy source that's out there that you can go to. These metaphors, this last one I want to share that was kind of interesting was a person saying that it's really puts the accountability more on themselves. They said it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube, but there's some things you just have to figure out for yourself. We feel like as we think about this and contemplate it, we'll send you more of these metaphors. You can look at those. It's helpful to see what the dynamic is in the minds and the hearts of these people and what they're trying to process. We think it means and it talks to the need for authenticity, for leadership, for consistency in messaging. And when you say something different, that you need to go out overt and effort to making sure to explain as to why. It speaks to the need of understanding, and it speaks to the need of being determined and clear without polarization. There's a hunger and clamor for people to be able to know who they can turn to, that they can trust. Now, with that, I'd like to turn over to Yogesh Chavda, who's joining us from Pinterest. Yogesh, are you there? There you are.
Yep, I'm here.
And Yogesh, you're going to share your screen and talk through some of the things you've been seeing around the world in a new and unique way of how people post and share on your platform. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Let me first make sure that everybody can see my screen properly. Is this working, or are you using the presenter view?
No, it's there.
It's there?
Yep, in the right way.
Perfect. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Just let me get into it so we have enough time for questions if that's the case. So for those of you who don't know Pinterest too well, our mission basically is to bring everyone the inspiration to create the life they love. So what that basically means is that from a visual discovery perspective, people can find pictures or pins, as we call them. You can create your own boards, you can save them, and people typically do this to plan for certain projects that they are working on, whether it is home decor or recipes, or in some cases weddings or prom or whatever. People tend to save ideas on the platform, and that's their way of kind of like figuring out what they want to do in the coming months or weeks or whatever the case may be. Interestingly, because of that, the nature of our platform, we actually get insight in terms of how are people planning, what are they looking for, what is the specificity of what they're looking for, simply based on the visual nature of the pins that they're saving, right? So that gives us a unique insight into the consumer's mind in terms of what's going on. So just going to give you a couple of key facts about the company, and I'll move into a little bit about me as well, just so that you know who I am as well. We have over 367 million users globally, monthly active users. We have over 240 billion pins saved, over 5 billion boards created. So it's pretty big, and from a global perspective, we are currently monetized in about 20 plus markets, primarily North America, Australia, and Western Europe. So we still have a long way to grow, in the coming years as far as growth is concerned. So with that said, let me just talk a little bit about who I am. I spent most of my formative years in my career working at Procter & Gamble. I've also worked at Spotify and Kimberly-Clark and Amway. And I ran my own consulting company called Y2S Consulting for about 6 or 7 years before coming to Pinterest. Maury and I actually crossed paths when I was at Kimberly-Clark, working on the family care business, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So, I should just say, if you hear any thunder, there's a big thunderstorm rolling through Chicago right now. So there's lots of lightning and thunder happening in the background, just so you know. Okay, so let me talk to you a little bit about what happened since I joined the company in January, and especially once the COVID crisis started in March. We had to essentially go from a research process, which was, having, a long lead time, process of scope design, project execution, project reporting, and share outs, which could take anywhere from a month to 3 months, depending on the complexity of the project. We were using third-party data, alongside some of our first-party data. It was mainly statistics oriented, and we would focus primarily. My insights team was pretty much focused on the U.S. market primarily, even though we are global kind of thing. When the COVID crisis started, we made a decision that we wanted to talk about the insights that we were seeing on the platform. We wanted to do this on a weekly basis. In other words, we wanted to share out a newsletter literally on a week-to-week basis, which meant that we had to look at our first-party data in a lot more depth. We had to be clear about what we were looking for. And over the course of the first 3 weeks of launching the newsletter, we went from just doing the US to doing it across 8 countries. Canada, Australia, UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy, alongside the US. And we've been doing this now for about 16 weeks consistently. And I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the learnings that we've been sharing with our clients through our newsletter, just as a way for you to kind of get a sense for some of the themes that we were picking up from our platform, as well as how some of our clients translated those themes into creative that they were then using it on our platform as a way to talk to our pinners in the right kind of context and framework, basically. One last thing I will say is that even through all that, we also had released a white paper that became a bit of a planning tool for a lot of our clients in terms of how to think about the COVID crisis as we were going through the different phases as well. So I'll share that as well as we go through this. So the first thing that we saw within the first couple of weeks is that there were really 3 different kinds of use cases that were emerging on the platform. The first couple of weeks was all about me, like, how do I look after myself? So we were seeing people, create boards and pins that were all around self-care. It was personal. They were looking, they were stressed out. People were really, worried about what was going to happen next. The speed of news that was coming was pretty fast, as everyone knows. So the anxiety that it created and the mental stress that it created was pretty significant. But then as we continued, through the crisis, we were seeing that it went from me to we, which was around, how do I look after my family, especially as schools started closing and people started working from home. So we were seeing searches around, how do I work from home? How do I entertain my kids while I'm working from home? How do I, use up all the food that I purchased in my panic buying? What kind of recipes can I, use to use up all the chicken I bought, or all the canned goods that I have, or how do I make bread at home? All those things we were seeing on the platform that were emerging. And then the third thing we saw was within a few weeks as well, was the fact that people were starting to search also for gifts, primarily for frontline workers and healthcare workers, which was linked to them showing their appreciation for what the first responders and everybody else was doing, basically. If I go to the next slide. So here's an example of 2 or 3 of our slides that we were sharing out with our clients. Work from home, as I mentioned, or even quarantine movie night ideas, or graduation celebrations. Especially with the virtual graduations that happened in May, as some of you may have experienced, in your own lives. We were seeing people actually starting to plan and figure out, how do I do these things? And they were using Pinterest as a platform for that. Let me show you a quick video we created that's actually available on YouTube now. This entire video was created in the context of the kinds of insights that we were seeing, and you'll get a sense for exactly the breadth and depth of what we were seeing.
COVID-19 continues to change lives. States issue safer at home or businesses.
Every example that you saw in this video has come out of the insights that we were seeing from the platform. So when we pulled this together and shared this, it was a good representation of the breadth and depth of what we were seeing, basically, of what people were actually doing. And quite frankly speaking, when we were sharing this with our clients, what we found is that a lot of people were actually looking at the data that we were sharing and saying, forget my brand, this is actually relevant to me, because I'm actually facing the same exact issue as well. So thank you for giving me examples of what I can do to keep myself sane as I'm going through the crisis at the same time as well. So the other thing that we also noticed, and this is a trends chart that we pulled all the way from the beginning of the crisis to, I think, about a week ago, maybe even a couple of days ago, in fact, where if you look at the blue line, if we were to index this, where we say that, people were usually looking for optimism and they were thinking about the future, things like, when you're planning for weddings or travel or anything that's future focused, if you were to kind of trend that out, when the crisis started, you can see that the blue line completely collapsed pretty much. And over time, it slowly started coming back to a place where we're kind of people are starting to plan again from a future state perspective. But what was also interesting when this happened is that if you look at the red line, you saw it kind of increase significantly, where the time horizon that people were planning for went literally from the future state to what do I do today? What do I do tomorrow? Because I don't know what the future holds for me tomorrow. Right now, if you look at where the trend lines are kind of like, coming to, it feels like people are starting to get back to some form of normal in the context of how COVID's currently working in their lives. My suspicion is that pending what happens in those countries where there's a significant growth rate, or even in the States where there's a significant growth rate, we're going to start seeing this the blue line go down again as people start pulling back from a future state perspective. So we'll see how this goes, but these are some of the early signals that we use as a way to kind of like understand and anticipate exactly what's going to happen next. So overall, as I've talked to you through this, there are really like 4 phases that we were identifying that we had started talking about back in April with our clients, where we talked about phase 1 being around triage and information, phase 2 being about empathy and relevance, phase 3 being around escapism and optimism, and phase 4 being about recovery and rebound. And as we were going through these phases, you can see that we've changed the language from present tense to past tense for the first 2 phases. Consumers are currently, where I would say, between phase 3 and phase 4. But again, everything is dependent on how things evolve based on the case rates that are either declining or growing, depending on which part of the world you're in, basically. So let me kind of like give you some examples of how clients use some of our data to create creative and that they were putting on our platform. So here's an example from Roberts. Where when people are feeling uncertain, the grocery stores were basically coming in and talking about food safety and how to buy in that context was one example. We were also, seeing other things around other areas where people were like looking in terms of phase 1, which was around coronavirus masks, home gyms, scavenger hunts for kids, and just having basically, memes or inspirational quotes that were helping people, keep people encouraged and somewhat de-stressed. In phase 2, we were seeing empathy and relevance. So let me just kind of like get to the numbers a bit. It was all around like, something that was related to supporting others. So whether it was frontline workers, healthcare workers, small businesses, and even also for themselves in terms of, what's the self-care checklist that I need to make sure I'm okay through that process. When it comes to escapism and optimism, we're seeing, future weddings and dream vacations and Christmas holidays and financial planning starting to emerge. I'll talk about the holidays in a second, but even like future weddings, a lot of people who were planning to get married this summer had to postpone their weddings, or alternatively, if they were determined to get married, they changed the venue of their weddings from, weddings at, in a religious site to backyard weddings. And we could see on the platform that shift happening as people started planning for backyard weddings. We saw the same kind of shift happening also for virtual graduation and virtual prom as another example, at least from a US perspective. And then recovery and rebound. There is no doubt that a lot of people are looking for something that helps anchor them in terms of the future. And there are some really broad themes that we're picking up right now. People are looking to do road trips. They're looking for theme parties, like a Hawaiian theme party. Because so many people are working virtually and through video conferencing and things like that, there is a trend that's emerging around creative eye makeup, at least for women, in terms of how they present themselves online. And then even from a health and wellness perspective, we're seeing people switch away from the panic buying that was going on, and people are buying anything and everything, to now, hey, I've kind of like fallen off the wagon with my diet. Let me get back to my health and wellness program. So they're looking for more healthy recipes as well. So with all that said and done, let me kind of like talk and share some examples of creative response. We literally just got this 30 minutes ago. Kohl's has been using our insights, and here's an example of one pin that they had posted where they talk about date night at home, right? And how do you do date night at home? In this case, virtual home. How do you create the right kind of experience? So this is a good example of that. I also have some other examples I can show you, again, depending on which kind of normal you're facing in. Here are examples from Herman Miller or Cheerios or REI in terms of how they were kind of like positioning themselves as they were trying to, present their brands in the context of COVID-19, and being very clear and specific about how it was fitting into where the Pinners headspace really was. Some more here in terms of, from an external perspective, whether it's US Bank or Teaks or Squarespace in terms of how people wanted to give back. These are some examples of that. And then, from a future state perspective, if you look at what Bank of America or, some of the travel companies are posting right now, they're tapping into the insight of that people want to get to some of the things that they were doing in the past. Everybody seems to be recognizing that it's not going to be the same as before, but even in the context of what the new world is, how can you still kind of like, enjoy some of the things that you used to do from an activity perspective? And especially for travel, this is a critical thing because as everyone knows, travel and hospitality have really been affected and impacted by COVID-19. Last but not least, I want to kind of like just end with a couple of slides. We are already seeing some trends around how people are planning for the holidays at the end of the year. So here's a chart that shows you a couple of different data points. So the graph on the left shows you the data for search between Pinterest versus another leading search engine for last year, all the way through December of 2019. And you can see that on Pinterest, we were already seeing that people were planning for holidays pretty early relative to the other search engine. This year, that's the graph on the right, we're seeing a 77% increase already in April for people planning how they want to manage the holiday period at the end of the year. Importantly, when you think about the holidays, one of the insights that we're identifying based on all the other kinds of pins that people are also capturing is the role of meaning. What does that, what will the holidays mean for me this year? Especially if you think about, your own lives in terms of how you've been interacting with people, your loved ones and your family in your immediate circle, but even some of the people that you may have not talked to in the past suddenly, resurfaced in your life in the last 3 or 4 months because of COVID-19. These are examples of how, meaning is being redefined and being reshaped. And how that'll anchor itself in the context of COVID-19 is going to be pretty interesting. So we'll be sharing a lot more of these insights over the coming weeks and coming weeks around how holidays kind of like emerging as a key theme for the rest of the calendar year. We've already been reporting on other themes like back to school and back to college, especially as each university or each school is dealing with different ways of opening up. So the kind of searches that we're seeing and the saves that we're seeing are kind of differentiated depending on where the person is actually living. So finally, if anyone's interested, feel free to join. We're actually hosting a webinar in the US on July 16th, in a couple of weeks about this. So where we'll be sharing a lot more detail around the holidays itself. But that's something that we're doing from Pinterest. You can see the QR code there on the right. You're free to use your phone and capture the details, and you can register for it if you're interested in that too. But that's really what I wanted to share today in terms of what we were doing at Pinterest. I hope you found it useful. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Yogesh, and that's really helpful and inspiring. And to have that information, I know we'll be able to follow up. We have a bit more data that Aaron is going to share to close us out, but two things. If we have one question right off the bat, please chime in right now, and then what we'll do is we'll keep, if Yogesh, if you can stay with us, we'll do the chat function if there's any other questions you have. If there is one, we'll do that now. Otherwise, I'm going to have Aaron go through the last tracking data that we wanted to share with you all today. Okay, if you do have any questions on there for Yogesh, please put it in the chat function, and we'll close out here with this follow-up. And that was fantastic, Yogesh. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Mari. So we're just going to hit on some of the other key metrics that weren't covered earlier that we've been tracking, and then we have a couple new questions that I know people will be interested in, so we'll share those quickly. In terms of the economy, the majority of people still think that both the state of the economy and the state of public health are pretty poor. We have roughly 50% of each saying that the status is either poor or in crisis. Although we did see some pretty significant jumps in terms of people saying they're excellent. So there are pockets where things are getting better, but it's still a very small minority of people. And even though the ratings of the economy and public health are kind of equally poor, you have a slightly larger group of people saying that we need to be balancing the economy with public health rather than putting all of our energy into public health. We didn't quite have the regional breaks on this data ready for today, but we'll be sharing that next week when we send around all of the materials from today. I think that'll be really interesting to see, given that there are starting to be spikes in certain regions of the country. And I think that theme came up in some of our discussions, that geography now is going to play kind of a larger role in things as we have hotspots that kind of spike and then come back down at different times. Similarly, we're kind of seeing a consistent trend that roughly half of people think that the US economy, that the impact will be a year or longer. That's pretty much unchanged from 2 weeks ago. We did add a new question where we asked people about changes to their purchases and investment patterns. Roughly half of Americans aren't really changing their purchases or investments. And then among the other half, about 32% of Americans are really trying to minimize their short-term risk, even if that limits long-term potential gain. And then you have another 20% that are sort of accepting short-term risk. So among people who are making changes, the kind of, two school of thoughts, not one that's really winning out over the other, with a little bit of kind of a skew towards people concerned about the here and now. I think part of that is because we don't really know what short term is or how long this environment's going to last. And that sort of goes along, I'll get to that later then, since I've reordered these. So when will behavior return to normal? We've been tracking behavior in a couple of different ways since the very beginning. A question that we had asked and paused but brought back this week is about a vaccine, which obviously has a huge impact on when things return to normal. And now we're up to 69% of Americans thinking that a vaccine will be ready in the next 12 months, which is up 4 points from 2 weeks ago. And also really kind of has baked into it an incredible amount of optimism, considering the normal timeline for a vaccine is sort of 3 to 6 years. So I'll get to this at the end, but this I think really speaks to some of the optimism that's out there, even if it's not stated, and also the just American belief in innovation. In terms of behavior, so these charts are set up a little bit differently than we've looked at them. Sometimes it kind of gives us a different way to look at the data. So these are cumulative. So as you go up the curve, eventually at more than a year, you get to 100% of people saying that they're likely to do each of the following. And so kind of the way I've been looking at this is, when does each line hit that 50% mark? When are the majority of Americans ready to do something? And so here, kind of the biggest takeaway, and we've seen this in the data for a while now, is that people are expecting to return to work far before they're expecting their kids to go back to school, or they would feel comfortable letting their kids return to daycare. And so that is going to be a continual challenge that I don't know if we've kind of seen how that's going to play out yet, but it's definitely something that, companies from an internal perspective need to keep in mind. Trips, business and personal, regardless of mode, it's really still 4 to 6 months out, which kind of takes us to the end of the year at this point, before a majority of people feel comfortable doing this, and the personal plane and train trips are really going to be the last to come back in terms of how people feel right now today. In terms of social or entertainment activities, the larger events, sporting events and concerts, those are still well in the future, although we're starting to see some slow movement with people hosting and attending social gatherings at their home or in smaller venues, although still looking kind of well into the fall before a majority of people feel comfortable with that. And then finally, the day-to-day activities. The last time we met, we had data that showed kind of a huge jump in eating at restaurants within the next week. I think we saw like an 11-point jump last time we looked at this data, and that is flat now. So I think the number of people who were comfortable and were ready to kind of go out into the world and do things have done so, or continue to do so, and kind of the rest are still lagging behind a little bit. This is one of our new questions. So we asked people to put themselves into one of 6 buckets, and it was a combination of being a cautious person or being a risk taker, and then whether they were more equally or less cautious in sort of the current environment. And the thing that struck me is that 75% of Americans described themselves as cautious, whether they were taking more or less precautions now. The fact that most people describe themselves that way was a little bit surprising to me. We don't see a lot of people saying they're actively being less cautious in the COVID-19 environment, and about a third saying more so, which tracks with our segments. And while we saw a decline in the concerned realists this week, you know, we also, and that was sort of evenly split among the hopeful optimists and the anxious worriers. And that speaks, I think, to what Mari said earlier about kind of the increasing divide, right? So you're either in this camp where everything's fine, we don't need masks, we need to worry about reopening, we should worry about the economy, or you're on the complete other side. And we see people in the middle kind of inching towards those two positions. The other kind of big thing that we saw this week was large positive shifts in underlying values. And so if you'll recall the last round of data that we had, social order had actually jumped to the top of the list in terms of net people thinking it's getting worse. That and security in this wave of data saw huge jumps. That actually brought them down on the list and put freedom back at the top as the thing that people were most concerned about. But across the board, we're seeing really large increases. For the first time in tracking this, we have an items other than concern for others, which also saw a huge positive jump in this positive territory. And so while some of the emotions that we shared, you know, that there's an increase in anger, people are more anxious and more worried, underneath those surface level emotions, people are starting to feel like things are getting a little bit better. I think part of that is probably the news cycle on the protests and some of the social unrest dying down. We did see this week, and we shared this earlier, that there's a really large decrease in news consumption on some of those topics. And then we also saw a 7-point increase in trust of local law enforcement officers, which saw a huge dip during that period of protest and social unrest. And so I think there's something there where there's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind that's making people feel better about the things that took social order and security to the top of this list. We don't have a ton of time to get into the data on kind of solutions for racial issues in the country. I will say there wasn't a lot of change from 2 weeks ago, but we added a new question that I definitely want to touch on briefly, where we asked people about a number of these kind of social issues or issues that the country faces that really are underscored with values and the values that we just talked about. Of sort of key note here is that on the performance axis here, and I've highlighted it in this gray box, there is very little variation in the percentage of Americans who rated the performance of our nation as excellent or good. You're looking, I think it's 7 points, a 7-point spread. And so Americans across the board on these types of issues are really saying, hey, we need to be doing better. And then in terms of importance, it's sort of, you have a much wider spread than you would expect given how we asked the question. We asked people to pick up to 3. So, you know, we couldn't have them all clustered in one place because of the way we asked the question. But even still, these are a little bit more spread out than you would expect. And it's, you know, economic opportunity and racial equality are really where people want to see the US focus the most. And so just to wrap up a little bit, I know we're running a few minutes over. Thanks for sticking with us. So there are a lot of things that we saw this week that feel maybe a little contradictory. So we've got anger and fear. We have this concern for freedom as a value that's coming back to the top. So people are concerned about losing their freedom. Increasing distrust of government and authority, but at the same time, concern for others and trust in belief in innovation, and this, you know, really high level concern with making sure we have equality and economic opportunity, and you know, from the numbers here, just a desire to do better. And so I was trying to kind of put together how would you summarize all of that? And then it dawned on me that we won't be meeting next week, because it's the 4th of July. And so when I was thinking about kind of all of those items together, it struck me that those are really a set of uniquely American points of view or value. And some of them don't go together, and some of them are issues that we've struggled with as a nation for a long time. But I think at the end of the day, it underscores that there are some core shared values and core shared concerns, even if we approach them in the same, or even if individuals approach those in a different way. And so that is kind of a lens that I would encourage people to look at things through while they're trying to figure out, you know, how to take that next step forward, as we talked about in our small groups today. And then the last thing I'm going to do before I kick it back to Mario and let him wrap up is Carrie Conco, who spoke out earlier when we all came back together from our breakout groups. She has been, I think, at every one of these, is a client I work with a lot and really enjoy working with. And she is taking time on this gorgeous DC summer Friday on her birthday to be here with us today. So Carrie, I told you I was going to give you a shout out. Happy birthday. And so, Mari, I'll go ahead and let you kind of wrap up and take any questions that people have.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thank all of you for joining us. If you do have any questions, please feel free. We do want to let you know we'll be on again in 2 weeks. We appreciate the level of feedback that we get from you afterward. We welcome any email follow-up to explain things that you liked or things you'd like more of. We'll go ahead and get this information out to you today that we shared today, but we'll be doing a little more digging into it that we'll share with you next week. Would also love to get any feedback on, you know, would you like to have half of this time dedicated to more discussion, and then, or would you, you know, like to have more guest speakers or what have you? Is this still of value to you? As you know, those of you who've been with us from the beginning, we started this because we just felt like we needed a venue to all hit pause and talk and share. And we plan to continue to do so, but we're more than open for any feedback. We have been contacted, I've been in contact actually with some of the CEOs from some of our competitors, large organizations and small, and they have expressed an interest of doing a reprisal of that CEO forum. And so we're looking at doing that on July 24th. And so please look forward to any topics you'd like us to put before that group, a panel of 3 to 5, our company as well as our competitive set and those that work in the same space. Let me know. So thank you so much, and we wish you all a great weekend. Anybody have anything, parting questions or commentary? So I know we're just a few minutes over. Okay, well with that, take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Margie.